I've lived in bustling cities all my life. When my national TV show, Saving Tales with Natasha Reyes, got renewed for its 5th season, I decided to trade the high-rise chaos for a more tranquil suburban setting, somewhere I could find peace between filming projects. That's how I ended up moving to Cedarwood Grove, a picturesque neighborhood with curved streets lined by stately cedars, ample backyard spaces, and a glossy brochure boasting about its friendly community vibe. Upon arrival, I was taken by the scenery. Rows of houses gleamed under the midday sun, their front gardens a riot of colors, rose bushes, hydrangeas, neatly trimmed lawns. My own home was modest compared to the mansion some celebrities chose, but I loved the wide porch and the quiet hush of the street. My tabby cat, Ginger, meowed excitedly as I carried him inside, as if sensing the fresh start. Not long after the moving truck departed, I was greeted by a middle-aged woman in a pastel blazer and impeccably coiffed hair. She wore a bright coral lipstick that stood out against her tanned skin. In her left hand, she clutched a thick binder labeled Cedarwood Grove HOA Regulations. "Hello," she said, her tone polite but tinged with condescension. "I'm Marcia Ackerman, but everyone calls me Karen, a little nickname that stuck. I'm the president of our homeowners association." I introduced myself, adding that I was grateful to join such a lovely neighborhood. Karen gave a scrutinizing once-over. "We value order and peaceful living here, Ms. Reyes. I trust you'll find our HOA guidelines quite clear." She extended the binder with a stiff-lipped smile. "If you have pets, be sure they aren't disruptive. We have strong rules on noise, external structures, and especially any unsightly fixtures." I accepted the binder, my mind already picturing the usual petty restrictions on mailbox colors and fence heights. But something in Karen's demeanor suggested her brand of oversight might go far beyond typical suburban nitpicking. After politely thanking her, I retreated indoors, where I skimmed the binder over a cup of tea. The guidelines were indeed extensive, font size 10, single-spaced, a labyrinth of do's and don'ts. I found it more amusing than threatening, at least for the moment. Later that evening, I settled onto my back porch. Ginger purred at my feet, the cicadas hummed in the twilight, and I felt a quiet hope. This was to be a refuge from my hectic filming schedule. Little did I know that behind Cedarwood Grove's manicured hedges lurked a growing conflict, one that would thrust me back into the public spotlight, not for my TV show, but for a battle involving innocent animals, unscrupulous sabotage, and a homeowners association president who would stop at nothing to enforce her twisted vision of community order. One notable feature of Cedarwood Grove was Lake Remington, a modest but scenic body of water bordering the subdivision. I was delighted to discover it behind a row of houses just a short stroll from my home. A wooden dock extended out into the water, and small signs indicated that residents could boat, fish, or simply admire the local waterfowl. According to the neighborhood brochure, the lake had an ecosystem teeming with ducks, geese, herons, and the occasional lost turtle. A week after I moved in, I decided to explore the lake at sunrise. Armed with my camera, since I often snap wildlife photos for my show's social media, I wandered down the tree-lined path leading to the dock. The water shimmered under the early sun, and a few ducks quacked lazily near the reeds. Peaceful, serene, exactly the kind of natural splendor I hoped for in a suburban retreat. But as I circled around the shoreline, I noticed an older man kneeling at the edge of the water. He was rummaging through what looked like a large plastic container labeled animal rescue equipment. Curiosity piqued. I approached and introduced myself. He looked up with a kind smile. "Ah, you must be the new neighbor. I'm Thomas Weldon, a volunteer with the local Animal Rescue Corps. We keep a few small rescue boats here, in case of floods or storms. The boats help save pets and wildlife that might get stranded." As a longtime advocate for animal welfare, my interest soared. That's wonderful. In my line of work, I've seen how vital such rescue equipment can be. Cedarwood Grove invests in these. Thomas chuckled wryly. "It's mostly the volunteer group's initiative, though the HOA claims to support it in principle. We've had a few major storms the last couple of years. The lake can rise fast, flooding lower-lying yards. We keep these inflatable dinghies around, plus supplies for treating injured animals." Just as we spoke, a figure emerged from behind a cluster of cattails. To my mild annoyance, it was Karen, wearing a pastel windbreaker. She eyed Thomas's gear with a visible scowl. Thomas, you know the rules about storing unsightly equipment on common grounds, she said. Let's keep it neat, or we'll have to reconsider your special permit. Thomas's eyebrows furrowed, but he maintained a polite tone. It's all organized, Karen. If we move it too far away, we'll lose precious minutes during an emergency. She sniffed. The aesthetics matter, and we can't have random folks rummaging around. I'll be inspecting everything later. Her gaze flicked to me. Ah, Ms. Reyes. Always nice to see our new residents taking an interest. Her abrupt, chilly departure left me unsettled. Thomas sighed. She's not very supportive, though the rest of the community usually is. We're meeting next week to discuss further safety protocols for the rescue boats. If you're interested, you should come. I assured him I'd be there. My curiosity about these rescue boats and Karen's obvious disapproval was piqued. Little did I suspect the lengths to which she would go to sabotage the program, jeopardizing not just the animals, but also her own reputation, and drawing me into a battle for the very soul of Cedarwood Grove. A few days later, I attended the rescue committee meeting in the Cedarwood Grove Community Center, an airy building with wide windows overlooking the lake. Inside, folding chairs were arranged around a modest stage with a podium. About 15 people gathered, chatting in low voices. I recognized Thomas near the front, organizing a stack of papers. Karen stood at the side, her arms crossed, flanked by 2 other HOA members. She offered me a curt nod as I found a seat. Thomas opened the meeting with a brief recap of the rescue program's importance. Last spring's storms caused the lake to swell, flooding the backyards of half a dozen houses. We rescued at least 7 pets, mostly dogs trapped in sheds. Plus, we found a duck tangled in fishing line. Our inflatable boats are crucial for these emergencies. He then gestured to the overhead screen, displaying photos of the rescue efforts, including canoes and dinghies gliding through knee-deep water in the streets. The images stirred memories of my own experiences filming rescue operations after hurricanes. Storm surges could be lethal to animals lacking escape routes. Karen stepped forward, clearing her throat. While we applaud the humanitarian side of these efforts, the HOA board has concerns. The boats are unsightly. They clutter the shoreline. Not to mention, the cost for maintaining them is creeping up, and we must consider how it might affect community aesthetics. She paused, scanning the crowd for support. A middle-aged woman named Paula raised her hand. But Karen, these are emergency resources. Why worry so much about aesthetics when they're stored behind a discreet storage bench? They save lives. A young man in the second row, Marco, spoke up too. If storms are as bad as last year, we need fast access. Relocating them would be risky. Karen's lips tightened. The cost to keep them in prime condition is also on the rise. Our HOA funds are limited. We could use that money for better landscaping or lighting near the entrance. Thomas stepped in. We volunteers handle most upkeep. The only expense we requested from the HOA was a small stipend for new patch kits and fuel for the outboard motor. Hardly a major line item. A moment of silence ensued. Sensing the tension, I stood and introduced myself. I'm Natasha Reyes, new to Cedarwood Grove, and also an animal welfare TV host. I'd like to say that from my professional background, quick water rescues can be life and death. Also, it's not just about dogs and cats. Wildlife gets displaced during floods, causing potential hazards for everyone. Having rescue boats on site is invaluable. Karen's expression shifted from annoyance to cold calculation. Ms. Reyes, while we respect your credentials, I ask that you consider the broader perspective. The HOA's main concern is ensuring Cedarwood Grove remains a serene, upscale community. We must strike a balance between compassion and practicality. The group murmured. I felt a flicker of frustration. Compassion should always be part of practicality, especially where helpless creatures are concerned. The meeting ended with no definitive resolution. Karen insisted the board would review budget allocations, which left the rescue committee uneasy. Something about her stance felt more personal than just a budget or aesthetics. I suspected that beneath the veneer of civility, Karen harbored a deeper disdain for the rescue operations. I left determined to keep an eye on developments. My show's new season was about to start production, but I wanted to ensure Cedarwood Grove's rescue program didn't get gutted by Karen's petty authoritarian streak. I had no idea how soon an emergency might arise that would place that rescue gear, and the animals it was meant to save, squarely in the line of fire. Summer wore on, and ominous weather forecasts began circulating. Meteorologists warned of an approaching tropical depression that might intensify, bringing heavy rainfall to our region. As soon as I heard the news, I thought of Cedarwood Grove's low-lying streets near Lake Remington. Memories of last year's flooding were fresh in many residents' minds, generating a flurry of messages on the neighborhood forum about emergency readiness. Thomas and the other rescue volunteers sprang into action, double-checking the boats, life vests, and medical kits. They posted guidelines: how to secure one's yard, keep pets indoors, and identify local shelters in case of severe flooding. Meanwhile, Karen posted a contrasting message on the same forum. No cause for alarm. Trust the HOA's drainage improvements. Please keep neighborhood aesthetics intact. Excessive boarded windows or sandbags create an eyesore. Her emphasis on appearances over safety was galling. A few neighbors commented with polite skepticism, but Karen insisted the storm would likely be mild. Unfortunately, the forecast took a sharper turn. The tropical system strengthened more than expected, heading straight towards Cedarwood Grove. Rainfall estimates soared. In my capacity as an animal advocate, I had connections with local rescue groups. They were already on standby, anticipating potential flooding in multiple suburbs. On the eve of the storm's expected landfall, I ventured to the lakeshore to help Thomas and volunteers secure the equipment. The sky was gray, thunder growled in the distance, and the wind rustled the cedars ominously. We found everything in place: the small rescue dinghies, stacked and neatly covered, the outboard motor stored in a locked shed, life jackets folded in bins. Thomas handed me a patch kit, chuckling wryly. We might need these if we end up ferrying cats and dogs over rooftops. I took the kit with a smile. Let's hope for minimal damage, but better safe than sorry. Just then, a familiar presence loomed behind me. Karen, clad in a slick pastel raincoat, marched over, scowling at our preparations. You're all overreacting, she snapped, arms folded. The storm may pass us by. Why spread panic? Thomas tried to remain diplomatic. Better to be prepared, Karen. We don't want to scramble at the last minute if waters rise. She scoffed. If this storm fizzles, we'll have wasted resources. And the HOA board is still deciding whether to keep these boats. Don't forget that you need official clearance for major volunteer actions on common property. She glared at me in particular, perhaps resenting my public figure status and how it might sway local opinions. I returned a calm smile. I host an animal welfare show, Karen. If there's a chance these boats can save even one life, human or animal, I'd say it's worth it. She pressed her lips tight, said nothing more, then turned and stalked off. A swirl of unease twisted in my gut. Karen's hostility felt more personal than ever, like a vendetta. Storm clouds gathered overhead, and in my heart, I sensed a confrontation brewing that far surpassed typical HOA disputes. Rain began late that night, light at first, then pounding in sheets against rooftops. The howling wind battered trees, and occasional lightning illuminated Cedarwood Grove with eerie flashes. Sometime around 2 a.m., half awake, I heard the urgent blare of phone alerts for a flash flood warning. I stumbled to the window, seeing water pooling along the street. My yard was still above water, but I knew from local chatter that several blocks near the lake might already be submerged. My first thought was to check on the rescue committee. I texted Thomas. Me. Flooding confirmed. Are the boats deployed? Need help. He responded almost immediately. Thomas, bad news. The rescue dinghies are damaged. Somebody slashed them. We found them deflated and cut open. We're in shock. My heart lurched. Slashed boats? Could it have been an accident? Vandalism? I hurriedly threw on a rain jacket, grabbed my phone and flashlight, then dashed into the storm toward the lakeshore. The scene was chaotic. In the dim street lights and flickering lightning, water glistened in rivulets across the common grounds. Thomas and two other volunteers crouched near the boat storage area, rummaging through shredded rubber. Sure enough, deep knife-like cuts marred the inflatable surfaces. Even the motor's fuel line had been severed. Thomas's face was ashen with anger and disbelief. We prepared for storms, but not sabotage. Now we have no operational dinghy. The bigger boat is holed too. We're scrounging for patch kits, but it's severe damage. I knelt beside him, a wave of outrage coursing through me. Who would do this? We need these for the flooding tonight, not 2 weeks from now. A volunteer named Darius shook his head grimly. We tried calling the HOA, but they told us not to jump to conclusions. They said maybe the storm debris did it. But these slashes, it's obviously intentional. My mind flashed to Karen's hostility. Could she? The thought seemed unthinkable. Yet her opposition was intense. If it was her or someone under her influence, they had chosen a life-threatening moment to sabotage. Animals and people could be trapped right now. Squelching my fury, I turned to the volunteers. Let's see if we can salvage at least one dinghy. I have a patch kit in my house from Thomas's stash. Maybe we can fix enough to float. We scrambled in the downpour, rummaging for adhesives, cutting pieces of rubber from older defunct rafts to cover the slashes. All the while, the rain hammered us mercilessly. I called a friend from a local animal rescue group, seeing if they had a spare boat or canoe we could borrow. They promised to head over with a small rowboat. The night blurred into a frantic attempt to salvage our rescue capacity. I couldn't fathom the cruelty or recklessness behind sabotaging rescue gear on the eve of a storm. By the time dawn crept in, the water had risen, submerging part of the shoreline. We had one dinghy partially patched, enough to test in shallow water. It leaked slowly, but it might function for short trips. But for how many animals, or humans, could we realistically help with just a half-broken raft? My stomach churned. Cedarwood Grove faced a flood, and we were crippled by sabotage. This was just the start of the heartbreak. By morning, Lake Remington had overflowed onto nearby lawns and streets. Though the rainfall tapered, the standing water was knee-deep in some yards, and anxious neighbors tried to protect their pets. I joined Thomas and Darius, piling into the partially patched dinghy near the worst flood zone. Our plan was to check on calls about trapped animals. We had barely pushed off from the flooded sidewalk when we got an urgent text from a homeowner named Rachel. My dog Coco is stranded in a shed behind rising water. I can't reach her safely. Please help. Navigating a leaky raft was nerve-wracking. Thomas bailed water with a small plastic scoop while I rowed carefully past floating debris. The sabotage was evident in the raft's sluggish buoyancy, and every few minutes, we needed to pause to recheck the patches. Reaching Rachel's house, we found the back shed surrounded by swirling, murky water. The building's door was jammed. Inside, a frantic barking rang out. My heart clenched. Coco sounded scared. We managed to maneuver closer, stepping out of the dinghy to wade through thigh-deep water. Thomas used a crowbar to pry open the shed. A trembling golden retriever leaped into his arms. Relief soared through me. This was exactly why we needed working rescue boats. After delivering Coco to safety, we trudged back out. A few more calls came in about cats on rooftops or wildlife sightings in unexpected places. Each mission was a gamble with our battered boat. Meanwhile, news circulated that the sabotage might have been deliberate. Some neighbors were furious, others refused to believe it. Rumors spread that Karen had been seen around the lake late at night, though no proof existed yet. Midway through the day, I received an alert from Cedarwood Animal Rescue, the organization I often partnered with. Their truck was en route with a functional inflatable craft. That was a godsend. We'd soon have an additional vessel to help ferry out pets from flooded corners of the neighborhood. However, the question remained: who had sabotaged our main rescue fleet? As the sun dipped low, storm clouds parted, revealing a battered neighborhood that still needed help. In my gut, I suspected Karen's involvement or someone who shared her twisted priorities. My anger simmered, but first we had to keep saving animals. By dusk, we'd retrieved half a dozen cats, 2 dogs, and a few wildlife casualties, bringing them to safer ground. Tired, soaked, but determined, we pressed on. Karen was nowhere to be seen, but evidence of her hostility lingered in the rumors swirling among residents. Tomorrow, I'd confront her directly. My patience for quiet diplomacy was waning. If sabotage was her doing, we'd ensure she faced the full consequences. The day after the flood crested, waters slowly receded, leaving soggy lawns and mud-caked roads. While most neighbors focused on cleanup, I headed straight for the HOA office in the community center. The sabotage had nearly cost animals their lives. Coco the golden retriever was just one of many that might have perished. We needed answers. I found Karen in the small reception area, typing briskly on a laptop. She looked up with her usual stiff posture and forced smile. "Ms. Reyes," she greeted. "What brings you here?" "I'm quite busy coordinating post-storm matters." "Good morning," I said curtly. "I'm here about the sabotage of the rescue boats." "That's no minor matter," Karen, the timing is suspicious, right before the flood. People's pets were endangered. Do you have any information about who might be responsible? Her expression turned frosty. I have no idea. You shouldn't accuse me or the HOA without evidence. Perhaps it was teenage vandals. Storms attract all sorts of troublemakers. I studied her, anger simmering. Except this act targeted only the rescue inflatables. If it was random vandalism, you'd expect more widespread damage. Also, you've made it clear you despise those boats, calling them unsightly and a waste. Karen's eyes flared. That's quite the insinuation. I'm a pillar of this community. I'd never stoop to such reckless criminality. I took a breath, trying not to lash out. All right, but if you truly have no involvement, you'll want to cooperate with the investigation, right? We plan to notify the local authorities about the sabotage, check any security cams near the lake, see if the HOA's cameras caught anyone sneaking around. A flicker of unease crossed her face. The HOA's cameras were offline. Some technical glitch. Regardless, I'll certainly do my duty if the police approach me. But let's not jump to conclusions. Good day, Ms. Reyes. I left, unconvinced by her feigned innocence. Outside, I called Thomas to coordinate filing a police report. We'd gather statements from neighbors, especially anyone who might have glimpsed suspicious activity that stormy night. As a well-known TV personality, I had a wide platform, something Karen seemed to underestimate. If I needed to, I'd leverage public attention to expose the sabotage. But first, we'd try the formal route. Unbeknownst to me, a new wave of drama lurked on the horizon. Karen's sabotage was just the tip of the iceberg. As we probed deeper, we'd uncover the lengths she was prepared to go to keep Cedarwood Grove in her iron grip, regardless of who or what got harmed in the process. I hadn't planned on turning Cedarwood Grove's internal drama into a national headline. My TV show typically focused on uplifting animal rescue stories. Yet after the sabotage, the local volunteers, exhausted, outraged, urged me to use my media connections. They feared that if the HOA quashed the investigation, the sabotage might be swept under the rug, inviting future tragedies. With Thomas's blessing, I reached out to a local news reporter, Clarissa Dunn, who specialized in community issues. When I explained the sabotage of emergency animal rescue boats and the near misses during the flood, her eyes widened. That's a huge story. Someone targeted life-saving equipment, she said, scribbling notes feverishly. Within days, Clarissa's report aired on the 6 p.m. local news. Emergency rescue boats sabotaged in Cedarwood Grove storm. Volunteers suspect foul play. The segment showed footage of the slashed dinghies, interviews with Thomas, even a brief cameo of me confirming that animals nearly drowned because of the damage. The piece ended with an open question: who would sabotage essential rescue equipment? The public response was swift. Social media lit up with outrage. Hashtag #SaveCedarwoodAnimals started trending locally on Twitter. Neighbors from adjoining communities expressed horror that anyone would do such a thing. Some demanded the HOA take a stand, or that the police treat it as a priority. My producer at Saving Tales saw the coverage and asked if we should film a follow-up for the show, amplifying the story nationwide. Karen's reaction was predictably furious. The next day, an email blast from the HOA declared the news report sensationalized, insisted there is no proof of sabotage, and warned residents about making false accusations. She singled out me, by name, for stirring negative publicity. The tension soared. Meanwhile, a detective from the local precinct visited Cedarwood Grove to gather evidence. He spoke with the rescue committee, took photos of the slashed boats, and promised to check if any security cameras in the broader neighborhood might have captured suspicious movement. Despite Karen's attempts to minimize the incident, the public momentum grew. Donations poured into the rescue group to replace destroyed equipment. I welcomed the support but dreaded the confrontation ahead. Because if Karen had the audacity to sabotage rescue gear, what might she do next, faced with a wave of condemnation? Thanks to donations, the rescue committee quickly replaced the shredded dinghies. We purchased sturdier inflatables with reinforced fabric, along with new motors and essential supplies. Under the spotlight of local media, the HOA board had little choice but to allow the new equipment, though Karen hinted at imposing stricter storage regulations soon. For a brief moment, it seemed the crisis might blow over. The storm subsided, the water fully receded, and Cedarwood Grove's daily life returned to normal rhythms. Yet I sensed an undercurrent of resentment from Karen. She posted repeated rants on the HOA forum about the cost to property values from ongoing negative press and outsiders meddling in our private affairs. Her more sycophantic supporters echoed these complaints. One afternoon, the newly arrived rescue boats were scheduled for a demonstration. Thomas wanted to show the neighborhood how to operate them in case volunteers needed an extra hand. We invited everyone to the lakeshore. Kids fed ducks, families strolled around, and we set up a small canopy with animal safety brochures. I gave a short talk, explaining how quick rescues could mean the difference between life and death for stranded pets. The crowd seemed receptive, many praising the new boats. But as I scanned the onlookers, I spotted Karen lurking at the periphery, arms folded and lips pursed. When the demonstration concluded, she vanished without a word. We later found out that behind the scenes, Karen was quietly lobbying the board to pass new rules restricting watercraft usage on Lake Remington, under the guise of protecting the tranquility of the lake. If passed, these rules would complicate the rescue boat's deployment, requiring special permissions for each use. The hypocrisy was galling, like she was methodically undermining the rescue effort in every way possible. Little did she realize, her brazen attempts to sabotage our program and hush the controversy would soon backfire spectacularly. A bigger platform, my own national TV show, was about to shine a much brighter light on Cedarwood Grove's sabotage scandal, catapulting Karen into unwanted infamy. In the wake of the local news coverage, my show's producers at the network grew intrigued by the Cedarwood Grove fiasco. They proposed dedicating a special segment to highlight community-based animal rescue initiatives and the shocking sabotage that nearly cost innocent lives. I hesitated at first. Exposing my own neighborhood strife felt too personal. But, ultimately, I recognized the importance of raising awareness about the need for emergency rescue measures and the dangers of obstruction. Filming began 2 weeks later. Our camera crew arrived early, capturing shots of Lake Remington's tranquil waters and the brand-new rescue boats. We interviewed Thomas, who described the sabotage's impact on the volunteer program. We spoke with neighbors who recounted how the damaged boats nearly prevented them from rescuing their pets. Everyone's raw emotion underscored how vital these resources were. I stood on the dock, microphone in hand, filming my introduction. I'm Natasha Reyes, and on this special episode of Saving Tales, we travel to a suburban neighborhood that faced a shocking act of sabotage. Someone deliberately destroyed emergency animal rescue boats on the eve of a major storm. But the volunteers refused to give up, and their efforts saved many animals. Today, we investigate who could do such a thing and how the community is fighting back. Karen, predictably, refused to appear on camera. She emailed my producer a stiff statement decrying outsider sensationalism. However, the crew filmed her from a distance one afternoon, stomping away from the lake, phone in hand, annoyance etched across her features. Even without an interview, her contempt for the rescue project was plainly visible. When the special aired nationwide a few days later, it struck a nerve. Viewers were incensed by the cruelty behind destroying rescue equipment. Social media ignited with condemnation. The name Cedarwood Grove trended regionally, and some well-known animal welfare advocates tweeted about the story, calling for thorough investigations. Donations to local rescue groups surged once more, and the local police department faced pressure to find the perpetrator. Within Cedarwood Grove, neighbors watched in awe as their quiet suburb became a national talking point. Some were proud of the volunteers. Others were mortified that the HOA's petty infighting was broadcast to millions. Karen stewed, furious at the negative publicity. She posted a scathing letter on the HOA website, blaming me for manufacturing drama. Yet the tide of public sentiment was firmly against sabotage, no matter how Karen tried to spin it. From my vantage, the coverage was bittersweet. Our special had successfully raised awareness and garnered support for the rescue efforts. But I knew the spotlight also turned Cedarwood Grove into a fishbowl. If Karen truly was behind the sabotage, she had nowhere to hide from the growing calls for accountability. The stage was set for a final showdown, and I sensed we were closing in on the truth. One evening, after the national broadcast, I got a call from Officer Felix Stone, the detective assigned to our sabotage case. He sounded excited. "Ms. Reyes, we might have a lead." Some residents in a neighboring street installed private security cameras. The night of the sabotage, one camera picked up unusual activity near the lake. He invited me to meet at the police station so I could review the footage. Arriving there, I found Officer Stone seated in a small viewing room. He queued up grainy nighttime footage from a camera perched on a distant roof, partially obstructed by trees. The timestamp matched the stormy night. Although the resolution was poor, we could make out a solitary figure in a hooded raincoat approaching the rescue boat area. They carried a small object that might have been a knife or tool. Stone paused the video. Difficult to see a face, but watch carefully at this moment. There's a flash of lightning. He resumed, stepping through frame by frame. In one bright flash, the figure glanced upward, exposing part of their face. My breath caught. The features were blurry, but the shape of the haircut, the angle of the jaw, it bore a strong resemblance to Karen. Could it be her? I asked quietly. Stone nodded. It's not definitive, but you can see a distinctive short coiffed hairstyle, just like Ms. Ackerman's. Also, the figure's build and posture match. We can't claim it's conclusive evidence yet, but combined with motive, it's highly suspicious. I felt a chill of vindication and horror. The very person who'd repeatedly tried to hamper rescue efforts likely took that final step into criminal sabotage. Stone explained that they would question Karen soon, present the footage, and see if she had an alibi or other explanation. When I left the station, my mind reeled. If Karen was guilty, she had risked lives purely for petty reasons. This went beyond typical HOA tyranny. It was malicious, possibly felonious. I called Thomas, who was equally stunned. At least the truth is surfacing, he said, voice trembling with anger. We owe it to the animals we saved, and the ones who might have died, to see this through. As news of the footage spread among local authorities, I braced for Karen's reaction. She'd likely fight back fiercely, perhaps concoct an alibi or challenge the footage's clarity. But there was no turning back now. If the police pressed charges, she would face the full might of a criminal investigation, a far cry from her comfortable perch atop the HOA. Officer Stone wasted no time confronting Karen with the footage. As expected, she denied everything. Rumor had it that she told the police she was at home all night, and that any resemblance in the footage was purely coincidental. She questioned the camera's angle, the clarity of the lightning flash, and even alleged that it might be a neighbor with a similar haircut. Despite her denials, the weight of circumstantial evidence was building. Police discovered footprints near the sabotage site matching a women's shoe brand Karen was known to wear. Neighbors recognized the distinctive floral soles she favored. Additionally, phone records placed her near Lake Remington around the time of the sabotage. A cell tower ping contradicted her claim of being at home. Behind closed doors, the local DA considered potential charges: criminal mischief, vandalism, animal endangerment, and reckless disregard for public safety. If convicted, Karen could face serious penalties. Meanwhile, the HOA board was in turmoil. Several members quietly sought ways to distance themselves from her. A few demanded she step down to avoid dragging the entire association into scandal. Karen, cornered, lashed out. She posted combative updates on the HOA forum, accusing me of orchestrating a witch hunt. She threatened legal action for defamation against anyone who publicly named her as the saboteur. But her bravado rang hollow. With every new revelation, her position weakened. Sensing an impending legal showdown, my show's producers asked if I'd be willing to share the developments on air. However, I wanted the official investigation to run its course before we fueled more media fire. This was about truth and justice, not mere ratings. Meanwhile, the rescue committee pressed forward with their mission. We forged new safety protocols and scheduled training sessions for volunteers. The sabotage had taught us how vulnerable we were to internal sabotage. People now realized that local politics could endanger not just property values, but living creatures. The entire fiasco transformed the community's perspective, though the price had been heartbreakingly high. Ultimately, the evidence proved too damning for Karen to evade. After a thorough review, the district attorney's office found probable cause to issue an arrest warrant. On a brisk afternoon, as neighbors pruned hedges or walked their dogs, 2 patrol cars rolled quietly down Cedarwood Grove's main drive, stopping in front of Karen's immaculate house. An officer knocked at her door. Word spread fast. Within minutes, Curious residents peeked from behind curtains, some stepping onto front lawns to watch. I stood across the street, heart hammering. A swirl of conflicting emotions welled up, relief that justice was near, sadness that it had come to this, anger at the harm she'd inflicted. Karen emerged on her porch, wearing a neat blouse and black slacks, her face pale. She exchanged words with the officers, likely protesting. But after a tense minute, she extended her wrists. The handcuffs clicked on. Gasping bystanders watched the once powerful HOA president led to a squad car, head bowed in shame. A hush fell as the cars pulled away, leaving a stunned hush in their wake. Some neighbors murmured a mixture of pity and scorn. Many had known Karen for years, never imagining she'd commit a crime that endangered animals and possibly humans. Others quietly said it was about time her authoritarian streak was curtailed. I felt tears prick my eyes, not for Karen, but for the heartbreak all around, the sabotage, the near losses, the betrayal of trust. Soon, the reporters arrived, capturing footage of the now empty house, the closed front door. The saga of Sabotage had reached a dramatic turning point. Now the courts would decide Karen's fate. Once Karen's arrest became public, Cedarwood Grove boiled with activity. The HOA board scrambled to appoint an interim president. They held an emergency meeting to address concerns about ongoing sabotage. A wave of residents demanded an internal audit to check if Karen had used HOA funds for anything shady, or if there were other covert actions that might come to light. Media trucks lined the main entrance, occasionally filming man-on-the-street interviews with neighbors. Thomas found himself cornered by reporters eager for fresh quotes. He told them plainly, "We never wanted drama, just the ability to rescue animals during emergencies. I hope we can now move forward, ensuring no one sabotages us again." Amid this frenzy, Karen's supporters, once vocal about her leadership, fell silent or disavowed her entirely. A handful insisted the arrest was a misunderstanding, but the weight of evidence was too strong for rational doubt. With Karen in custody, her property was subject to search warrants. Police uncovered receipts for a specialty knife matching the slash patterns, plus potential evidence of her having scouted the boat area days before the storm. On social media, a wave of condemnation crashed down. Strangers across the country lambasted her cruelty. My own show's audience was especially outraged. Dozens wrote in, expressing support for the rescue volunteers and relief that the saboteur was caught. While some demanded a swift trial and maximum punishment, I tempered my public statements, reminding fans that the legal system would handle it. Meanwhile, the rescue committee finalized plans to expand our equipment storehouse and set up better security measures, ensuring no single saboteur could again cause such devastation. With each day, Cedarwood Grove inched toward healing, though scars remained. The upcoming trial loomed large, where we'd finally hear Karen face the consequences of her betrayal. Karen's trial began on a rainy Monday morning in the Ravenwood County Courthouse. The charges included felony vandalism, animal endangerment, and reckless conduct. A small crowd assembled in the courtroom, neighbors, volunteers, reporters, and curious onlookers who had followed the story since the sabotage scandal. I arrived with Thomas and other rescue members, quietly taking seats near the front. Across the aisle sat Karen, flanked by her lawyer. She appeared gaunt, her once pristine hair slightly disheveled. She glanced at us without expression. The prosecution's case was straightforward yet damning. They presented the security footage showing a figure strongly resembling Karen slashing the boats, the footprints matching her shoes, the phone records placing her at the scene. Witnesses described her vehement opposition to the rescue project. Next came emotional testimonies from neighbors whose animals were nearly lost due to the sabotage. One homeowner choked up describing how they'd almost lost their cat in the flood because rescue efforts were delayed. Karen's defense insisted the footage was inconclusive, suggesting an unknown intruder might have borrowed her phone or shoes to frame her. Yet this story lacked plausibility, especially with no evidence of forced entry into her home or theft of her belongings. I was called to testify about the significance of the rescue boats and Karen's repeated attempts to undermine them. While I tried to remain factual, just recounting her hostility, the jury seemed to grasp the bigger picture. Karen saw the rescue dinghies as a blemish on her perfect neighborhood, leading her to sabotage them at the worst possible moment. By the trial's end, The prosecution's narrative was airtight. A petty vendetta escalated to criminal recklessness, nearly costing the lives of multiple animals. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated only for a few hours. Then they returned, stoic-faced, reading their unanimous verdict, guilty on all major counts. A ripple of relief spread through the gallery. Karen's face tightened, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. She collapsed into a chair as the judge polled the jury, each affirming the conviction. The once dominant HOA president was now a convicted felon, undone by her own cruelty. A month later, Karen returned to court for sentencing. The judge wasted little time, referencing the near-tragic consequences of her acts, the financial harm inflicted. The rescue group had to replace thousands of dollars of equipment, and the disregard for living creatures. In a stern tone, the judge pronounced 2 years in prison, considering the felony charge and the reckless endangerment of animals and property. Mandatory restitution. She was ordered to repay the cost of the damaged rescue boats, plus fines for each count. Community service ban. She was explicitly barred from holding any position of authority in a community organization for the duration of her probation after release. Property confiscation proceedings. Since her personal finances appeared insufficient to cover restitution and fines, the court approved a lien on her home, with the possibility of forced sale if she couldn't pay. Karen's sobs echoed in the courtroom as bailiffs escorted her away, handcuffed once more, the gravity of her downfall clear. Gasps and murmurs filled the gallery. Some neighbors shook their heads in shock. Others were expressions of grim satisfaction. Thomas and I exchanged solemn glances. Justice had been served, though the entire saga remained painful. Outside, reporters swarmed. I made a brief statement, praising the volunteers who endured adversity to save innocent animals. Thomas did the same, encouraging people to see that one person's cruelty doesn't define an entire community. Then we parted ways under the midday sun, an odd sense of closure settling in. Karen's reign over Cedarwood Grove was finished. The neighborhood, once overshadowed by her controlling presence, looked forward to re-establishing trust, reorganizing an HOA leadership that valued empathy over petty enforcement. In the days ahead, we'd focus on the bigger picture, ensuring the rescue program thrived and no sabotage could derail it again. With Karen incarcerated, the HOA board underwent a major shakeup. A special election installed Rebecca Lynn, a mild-mannered accountant, as the new president. Under her guidance, the board apologized for the sabotage fiasco, vowed transparency, and repealed the proposed watercraft restrictions near Lake Remington. They also designated a portion of the HOA budget to officially support the rescue committee's operational costs, acknowledging the vital service it provided. A wave of relief swept the neighborhood. The rancor gave way to communal spirit. Neighbors volunteered to restore damaged landscaping, fix the battered docks, and raise additional funds for an improved boathouse. The sabotage had ironically spurred a stronger sense of unity. People recognized that preserving lives, human and animal, transcended petty aesthetic concerns. I found myself frequently invited to speak at local events, praising the volunteers' determination. Cedarwood Grove's messy drama had become a cautionary tale of what can happen when personal grudges meet unchecked authority. Yet the silver lining was a renewed commitment to empathy and readiness in times of crisis. As for my own life, I continued filming Saving Tales, weaving in Cedarwood Grove's story as an example of grassroots activism. Letters poured in from viewers across the nation who'd followed the Sabotage saga. Many expressed admiration for the neighborhood's perseverance. Some even started similar rescue committees in their own communities, inspired by our experience. Perhaps the greatest satisfaction came on a rainy afternoon months later, when the region faced another storm. The new rescue inflatables stood prepared in a sturdier boathouse. Although the water rose again, the volunteers swiftly deployed, saving a stray dog perched on a submerged fence. No sabotage, no drama, just neighbors collaborating to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. A testament to how far we'd come. Over time, Cedarwood Grove returned to the quiet haven I'd initially sought. On my free days, I strolled the lakeshore with Ginger, safely on a leash, to avoid disturbing the local ducks, appreciating the natural serenity. Occasionally, my mind flashed back to that frantic night of sabotage, The shredded dinghies, the shrieking storm, the frantic rescue attempts. It felt like a chapter out of someone else's life. Yet, I couldn't entirely forget the bitterness of living in a community overshadowed by a ruthless figure like Karen. She'd taught me a lesson about vigilance, how even the most peaceful-seeming enclaves can harbor an undercurrent of cruelty. But she'd also shown me the resilience that emerges when good people unite against wrongdoing. My colleagues teased me, saying I'd inadvertently starred in a real-life spin-off of my show. Some fans half-jokingly asked for updates on the Sabotage saga. Instead of dwelling on negativity, I used the platform to champion local rescue efforts. On my show's website, we listed ways to form volunteer committees, store emergency equipment, and build strong ties with local governments to formalize rescue protocols. The fiasco in Cedarwood Grove might well prevent future tragedies in other neighborhoods. At the same time, I was mindful of the lines between activism, sensationalism, and personal life. The Karen ordeal had overshadowed my quiet retreat, but I felt content in how it ended. The animals were safer, the community grew closer, and a destructive influence was removed. If fate had placed me here at just the right moment to help steer the outcome, so be it. That was worth any inconvenience or heartbreak. A year later, after the dust had truly settled, I received a surprising call from the Ravenwood County Animal Control. They wanted me to join a small ceremony at the local shelter. It turned out that Thomas and the rescue committee had nominated me for a Community Hero Award, recognizing the role I played in exposing the sabotage and advocating for the rescue program. At first, I felt shy about accepting. So many others had worked just as hard, if not harder. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it honored everyone who fought for those inflatable boats and the animals they saved. So I agreed to attend. On the day of the ceremony, I arrived at the shelter, greeted by warm smiles and wagging tails from adoptable dogs. The small crowd included Thomas, Darius, Paula, Marco, and other volunteers. Rebecca Lynn and a few HOA board members were there too, sporting supportive grins. Even some local officials showed up, praising the volunteer spirit. When the director handed me a commemorative plaque, I spoke briefly, emphasizing that the real heroes were the volunteers who risked their safety to rescue animals, plus the donors who replaced the destroyed gear. Everyone cheered. I spotted tears of pride in Thomas's eyes. Afterward, we gathered around a table filled with pastries and lemonade. The conversation turned to the future, ways to expand the rescue program, possible partnerships with neighboring communities. Instead of the old friction, a sense of optimism prevailed. Cedarwood Grove had come far from the bitter sabotage, forging a brighter path. As I petted a timid rescue puppy, I reflected on how one person's cruelty could spark an entire community's transformation. In that sense, even Karen's sabotage, as reprehensible as it was, had inadvertently galvanized people to stand up for what was right. I only wished it hadn't taken such a dangerous act to bring them together. Life continued. Cedarwood Grove retained its tranquil charm, with the gentle shimmer of Lake Remington at its heart. The rescue boats, now a symbol of unity, remained a permanent fixture, patched, improved, and constantly at the ready. Storms came and went, but with each test of nature, the volunteers proved unstoppable, determined never again to let sabotage or complacency endanger the voiceless creatures counting on them. Karen, meanwhile, served her prison sentence. Reports suggested she was resentful and unrepentant, though her attempts to appeal the conviction failed. Eventually, with mounting debts from court-ordered restitution, her house in Cedarwood Grove was seized and sold. The proceeds went toward paying the rescue group's legal and replacement costs. Fate had dealt her the ultimate blow, losing both her freedom and her property due to her own malicious actions. From my vantage as an animal welfare TV host, I saw the Cedarwood Grove saga as a poignant lesson. Compassion isn't a luxury, it's a necessity, especially when lives hang in the balance. If we let aesthetic obsessions or petty power struggles overshadow our shared humanity, we risk tragedies big and small. But when people unite, propelled by empathy and courage, they can overcome even the most insidious attempts to undermine good works. As I wrapped filming for the latest season of Saving Tales, I dedicated an episode to community volunteerism, featuring Cedarwood Grove's extraordinary rescue team. The footage showcased not just the handsome new inflatables, but also the neighbors' camaraderie, the playful dogs and cats they'd saved, and the shimmering waters where once a saboteur lurked. That chapter had closed with justice served, and in its place stood a tale of redemption, reminding us that, like the animals we strive to protect, we must always keep afloat, even through the stormiest seas.